Something strange has been happening to you lately. You don't react the same way anymore. You don't just chase the same people. You don't feel excited by the same goals. And part of you is scared, because it feels like you losing something, losing momentum, losing connections, losing the old version of yourself. But what if I told you, you're not losing anything? What if the discomfort, the silence, the isolation, the drop in motivation isn't a breakdown? What if it's a reconstruction? Most people mistake rewiring for failure. When their emotions stabilize, they think they've gone numb. When their circle shrinks, they think they've been rejected. When their ambition shifts, they think they've become lazy. But the truth is far more powerful. You are not collapsing. You are upgrading. And upgrades don't feel comfortable. They feel unstable before they feel strong. Because the old wiring inside you, the survival patterns, the insecurity, the overreactions, the fear of losing people is being dismantled. And dismantling always looks like destruction at first. You are not losing your edge. You are losing your old limitations. You are not being abandoned. You are being refined. You are not failing. You are evolving. Stay with me. Because once you understand what's actually happening inside you, you will stop panicking about this phase. And you start respecting it. Let's break down the signs that prove you are not falling behind. You are being rewired for something greater. 1. Discomfort is the first sign of upgrade. Let this go deeper here. Most people interpret discomfort as a warning sign. They assume that if something feels unstable, uncertain, or unfamiliar, it must mean they're moving in the wrong direction. So they retreat. They shrink. They go back to what feels safe. But what if discomfort is not a red flag? What if it's evidence that the old structure inside you can no longer contain who you're becoming? Think about this carefully. Every version of you was built for a specific level of awareness, a specific level of confidence, a specific level of survival. That old version learned how to function in certain environments. It learned how to cope with rejection, how to seek validation, how to protect itself. And for a long time that wiring worked. But now something has shifted. You don't laugh at the same jokes. You don't tolerate the same behavior. You don't crave the same approval. You don't chase the same outcomes. And that feels uncomfortable. Why? Because your internal identity is detaching from the habits that once defined it. This is where most people panic. They say, I feel lost. But you are not lost. You fear between versions. There is a psychological stage called identity destabilization. It happens when your beliefs, habits, and self-concept begin to outgrow the structure that once supported them. It's not collapse, it's renovation. Imagine living in a house for years. You know every corner, every crack, every sound in the walls. It feels familiar, even if it's small. Now imagine you start renovating it. Walls come down. Floors are ripped up. Dust fills the air. For a while it looks worse than before. But that destruction is not decay. It sets preparation. Your mind and nervous system operate the same way. When you outgrow old survival patterns, your system has to rewire itself, and rewiring feels unstable because the old neural pathways are weakening while the new ones aren't fully strengthened yet. That in-between stage feels like confusion. It feels like hesitation. It feels like uncertainty. You may question yourself more than usual. You may feel less confident in conversations. You may feel detached from goals that once excited you. You may even feel temporarily unmotivated. That doesn't mean you suffer regressing. It means your internal operating system is updating, and updates always require temporary slowdown. The reason discomfort hits so hard is because the ego equates familiarity with safety. The ego doesn't care about growth. It cares about predictability. So when your patterns shift, your ego interprets it as danger. But awareness knows better. Awareness recognizes that expansion always stretches you first. When muscles grow, they tear before they strengthen. When perspective grows, certainty dissolves before clarity forms. When identity grows, the old personality weakens before the new one stabilizes. So if you've been feeling unsettled lately, don't label it as failure. Ask yourself a different question. What inside me no longer fits? Because discomfort is often the first signal that you've exceeded your old limitations. You may feel like you're walking without solid ground beneath you. That's because the ground you once stood on has shifted, and it needed to. You're not meant to feel comfortable in spaces you've outgrown. You're not meant to feel energized by conversations that no longer align. You're not meant to feel secure inside habits that were built for survival instead of growth. Discomfort is the friction between who you were and who you're becoming. And friction generates transformation. The people who evolve the fastest are not the ones who avoid discomfort. They are the ones who recognize it as a doorway rather than a dead end. So if your life feels unfamiliar right now, if your reactions feel different, if your motivations are changing, if you feel slightly out of place in environments that once felt normal, do not rush back to the old version of yourself just to feel stable. Stay with the discomfort, because what feels like instability is actually expansion. You are not losing control. You are shedding an outdated identity, and shedding never feels gentle at first. It feels uncertain. It feels exposed. It feels like something is being taken away. But what's really happening is this. Your system is making space for a higher version of you, and that space can't be created without temporary discomfort. So don't fat fight it. Observe it. Because this feeling you're trying to escape might be the very evidence that you're leveling up. 2. Isolation is part of recalibration. There's a specific kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being rejected. It comes from outgrowing your surroundings. And if you've been feeling more alone lately, not dramatically abandoned, not heartbroken, just detached, this lesson is for you. Isolation is not always a social issue. Sometimes it sits neurological. When your internal wiring begins to change, your nervous system seeks quiet, it seeks space, it seeks distance from overstimulation. Not because you hate people, not because you're antisocial, but because recalibration requires silence. Think about this. You can hear subtle frequencies in a loud room, and when your awareness starts expanding, the signals you're picking up become more subtle. Your intuition gets quieter, but deeper. Your perception sharpens. You start noticing energies, intentions, inconsistencies, and that kind of perception cannot grow in chaos. So what happens? You begin pulling back, or life pulls people away from you. Conversations that once lasted hours now feel draining. Social environments that once energized you now feel heavy. Even certain friendships feel forced. And you start wondering, why do I feel so alone? But the better question is, what is this space creating? Isolation is not emptiness, it is compression. Before a rocket launches, it doesn't expand outward, it compresses inward. Systems check. Internal pressure builds. Stabilization happens in silence. You are in that stabilization phase. Your mind is reorganizing. Your emotional responses are recalibrating. Your dependency patterns are weakening. And in order for that to happen, your environment has to quiet down. There's another layer to this that most people miss. When you're constantly surrounded by others, your identity subtly adjusts to fit the group. You speak differently. You think differently. You even feel differently. Human beings are wired for social adaptation, but growth requires individual clarity, and clarity often requires solitude. If you never step away from the noise, you can't tell which thoughts are yours and which ones were absorbed from others. Isolation forces confrontation with yourself. No distractions, no validation, no external reinforcement, just you and your internal world. And that set's uncomfortable, because in that silence, you see your patterns clearly. You notice your fears. You confront your habits. You recognize where you've been compromising yourself just to feel connected. Isolation exposes, but exposure is necessary before transformation. There's also a biological element happening. When you've lived in stress for a long time, seeking approval, defending yourself, competing, performing, your nervous system becomes hyper-alert. It expects threat. It expects judgment. It expects instability. Recalibration means teaching your body safety again, and safety is easier to relearn in quiet environments. When you withdraw slightly, you're not failing socially. You set healing neurologically. Your system is asking for fewer inputs so it can strengthen internal processing. This phase may look like fewer invitations, fewer messages, less noise around your name. But this is not invisibility. This is incubation. Seeds grow underground first. No applause, no witnesses, no recognition, just internal development. If you're in this season, don't rush to fill the silence just to feel normal again. Many people sabotage their growth because they mistake quiet for rejection. They return to old circles, old distractions, old drama, simply to avoid being alone with themselves. But what if this solitude is intentional? What if this distance is creating clarity? What if you're not being excluded? You're being refined. There is a powerful shift that happens in isolation. You begin to enjoy your own company. You begin to trust your own thoughts. You begin to feel complete without constant interaction. And when that happens, relationships stop being a necessity. They become a choice. That sets recalibration. You are not becoming disconnected. You are becoming self-contained. And once you are self-contained, you no longer attach out of fear. You connect out of alignment. Isolation is not the end of belonging. It is the beginning of independence. And independence is the foundation of true power. So if your world has gotten quieter, if your circle has gotten smaller, if your phone feels less active, don't panic. You are not being forgotten. You are being recalibrated. And recalibration always happens in silence before it shows up in strength. 3. Old patterns begin to break automatically. One of the clearest signs that you are being rewired is this: you don't react the way you used to. Situations that once triggered you now barely move you. Words that once would have sent you into overthinking now land and pass. You notice something happening, but you don't explode. You don't chase. You don't defend with the same intensity. At first, this feels strange. You might even question yourself. Why didn't I respond? Why don't I feel as angry? Why am I not fighting this? Because the old wiring is weakening. For a long time, your reactions were survival-based. If someone ignored you, you felt rejected. If someone criticized you, you felt attacked. If someone pulled away, you felt threatened. Your nervous system interpreted everything through a lens of protection. So you defended. You over-explained. You overproved. You over-chased. Not because you were weak, but because that's how you were wired to survive. But survival wiring is not designed for growth. And when you begin evolving, those old automatic responses start to dissolve. You don't consciously decide to change. It just happens. You pause before responding. You observe instead of reacting. You let certain things go without a fight. And this can feel unsettling because you were used to intensity. Drama felt alive. Conflict felt stimulating. Proving yourself felt productive. Now it feels exhausting. This is not emotional shutdown. This is emotional regulation. There's a major difference. Shutdown is numbness caused by overwhelm. Regulation is calm caused by strength. When old patterns begin breaking automatically, It means your nervous system no longer perceives the same level of threat. It means your body doesn't feel the need to protect you in the same exaggerated way. That sets growth. But here sets where it gets deeper. Old patterns don't disappear quietly. They try to reassert themselves. You may feel moments where you're tempted to go back to who you were, to respond sharply, to send the long message, to prove your worth, to demand clarity. And sometimes you might even slip. But the difference now is awareness. Even if you fall back briefly, you see it clearly. You recognize the old habit in real time. That awareness alone proves rewiring is happening. Because before, you weren't observing your reactions, you were controlled by them. Now you are separate from them. That separation is power. There's also a grief that comes with breaking old patterns. Those reactions were familiar. They felt like part of your personality. They defined how people knew you. The passionate one, the sensitive one, the intense one, the one who always speaks up. Now you feel quieter, more measured, more selective, and it might feel like you start losing your edge. But you start not losing your personality. You start refining it. Intensity without control is chaos. Intensity with control is strength. When old patterns break automatically, you are no longer driven by impulse, you are guided by choice. That shift changes everything. You begin to realize you don't have to respond to everything. You don't have to defend every misunderstanding. You don't have to chase clarity from people who don't value you. Silence becomes a decision instead of weakness. Distance becomes a boundary instead of fear. Letting go becomes maturity instead of defeat. And the most powerful part? You don't feel the same emotional spikes anymore. The highs aren't as frantic. The lows aren't as devastating. You are stabilizing. And stability feels unfamiliar when you've lived in emotional extremes. Some people around you may even say you've changed. They may feel the difference in your energy. They may notice you're harder to provoke, harder to manipulate, harder to pull into unnecessary conflict. That's because the buttons they used to press no longer connect to the same wiring. And that can unsettle people who benefited from your old reactions. But this isn't set about them. It's about you gaining control over your internal system. When old patterns break automatically, it means the new structure is forming. You are no longer operating from fear-based reflexes. You are operating from awareness. And awareness is quiet. It doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to win arguments. It doesn't need to prove anything. It simply chooses differently. So if you have noticed that you are reacting less, chasing less, arguing less, defending less, don't mistake that for weakness. That is emotional mastery beginning to take root. You are not becoming passive. You are becoming intentional. And intentional people are powerful in ways reactive people can never be. For people feel the shift before you do. There's something unsettling that happens during transformation. Before you fully understand what sets changing inside you, other people start reacting to it, and it confuses you. You didn't announce anything. You didn't declare growth. You didn't make a dramatic exit. Yet suddenly, someone becomes distant. Someone becomes defensive. Someone starts testing you. Someone who once felt comfortable now feels uneasy. And you start left wondering, what did I do? The answer is simple. You changed energetically before you changed verbally. Human beings are highly sensitive to shifts in behavior, tone, boundaries, and presence. Even subtle changes in posture, response time, eye contact, and emotional availability communicate something powerful. When you stop chasing, people feel it. When you stop over-explaining, people feel it. When you stop reacting, people feel it. You may not even realize how much of your previous identity was built around accommodating others. Maybe you were the one who kept conversations alive, the one who apologized first, the one who smoothed conflict, the one who made yourself smaller to keep peace. Now that wiring is dissolving, and the people who were used to that version of you are sensing instability, not because you are wrong, but because the dynamic has shifted. Every relationship has an invisible contract, an unspoken understanding of roles. When one person evolves, that contract breaks, and not everyone is comfortable renegotiating. Some people thrived when you were insecure. Some felt powerful when you were uncertain. Some felt safe when you were predictable. But growth disrupts predictability, and unpredictability makes others anxious, so they may react in subtle ways. They might provoke you to see if you'll respond the old way. They might withdraw to see if you shall chase. They might criticize you to see if you shall shrink. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's unconscious. People are simply trying to restore the version of you they understood. But here's the deeper truth. When your internal standards rise, your tolerance lowers, and that shift is felt immediately. You may not notice your boundaries becoming firmer, but others do. You may not notice your tone becoming calmer, but others do. You may not notice your silence becoming intentional, but others do. Because your energy is no longer available for the same patterns, and that changes everything. There's also something else happening beneath the surface. When you evolve, you unintentionally mirror people's stagnation back to them. Your growth becomes a reflection of what they are not addressing in themselves. That reflection can inspire or threaten. Some will feel encouraged by your change, others will feel exposed, and exposure often leads to resistance. This is why transformation can feel socially destabilizing. It's not that you've done something wrong. It's that you're no longer vibrating at the same frequency, and misalignment creates friction. You may notice certain conversations drying up. You may notice certain invitations slowing down. You may notice certain bonds losing depth, and that can feel like rejection. But sometimes it's simply realignment. Not everyone is meant to travel with every version of you. Some people were aligned with your old coping mechanisms, not your new clarity. Some were aligned with your confusion, not your confidence. And that doesn't make them bad. It just makes them incompatible with who you're becoming. The mistake many people make in this stage is trying to reverse the shift. They lower their standards again. They overextend again. They return to old behavior just to restore comfort. But comfort built on misalignment is temporary. True alignment may feel quieter at first. Smaller circle, less noise, but deeper peace. If you're noticing changes in how people treat you, don't panic. Observe. Who feels uneasy around your calm? Who pulls away when you stop chasing? Who respects the new version of you without resistance? Your transformation is revealing dynamics that were always there. You're simply seeing them clearly now. And clarity can feel lonely before it feels empowering. But remember this. When your internal structure strengthens, the external structure rearranges, not as punishment, but as preparation. Some people will leave because they were connected to your old wiring. Others will enter because they align with your new one. You are not being abandoned. You are being resorted. And that sorting process is uncomfortable, but necessary. Because you cannot evolve and keep every old dynamic intact. Growth demands adjustment. And not everyone is willing to adjust with you. 5 motivation drops before clarity rises. One of the most misunderstood stages of transformation is this: you stop feeling motivated, and that scares you. You used to wake up with urgency. You used to chase goals aggressively. You used to feel pressure to achieve, prove, compete, win. Now, it feels different. You stir not lazy. You stir not depressed. You are just not driven by the same fuel anymore. And that sips because the fuel itself is changing. For a long time, your motivation may have been powered by survival. Prove them wrong. Earn validation. Avoid rejection. Escape your past. Outwork your insecurity. Survival motivation is powerful, but it's exhausting. It burns hot and fast. And when you begin rewiring, that survival engine starts shutting down. Not because ambition is wrong, but because fear-based ambition is unstable. When your identity shifts, your nervous system no longer responds to the same triggers. The pressure that once activated you now feels heavy. The urgency that once energized you now feels unnecessary. And in that space, motivation drops. This is where most people panic. They think, I've lost my drive. But you haven't lost your drive. You've lost your old reasons. There sets a difference. When the old identity dissolves, the goals connected to it dissolve too. If you were chasing success to feel worthy, and now you're learning self-worth internally, that external chase will naturally slow down. If you were chasing attention to feel seen, and now you feel more grounded within yourself, that hunger for visibility weakens. And without those old drivers, you enter a strange pause. It feels like stagnation, but it's actually clearing. Your system is uninstalling outdated motivations. Before new clarity can rise, the old noise has to fall silent. This stage is uncomfortable because it creates a temporary vacuum. You don't feel pulled forward the way you used to. You don't feel the same emotional charge behind your actions. You may question your purpose. You may question your direction. But what fist's really happening is recalibration. Imagine driving a car powered by unstable fuel. It moves fast, but it overheats. Eventually the engine can't sustain it. So the system shuts down, not to stop you permanently, but to protect the engine. That's what's happening internally. You're no longer being propelled by anxiety, insecurity, or competition. So you feel still, and stillness feels unfamiliar when you're used to chaos. There rests another layer here. When survival motivation fades, intrinsic motivation hasn't fully formed yet. Intrinsic motivation is quieter. It's not fueled by fear. It's fueled by alignment. And alignment takes time to clarify. You have to rediscover what actually matters to you, not what mattered to the insecure version of you. That process requires reflection. It requires patience. It requires space, which is why your energy may feel lower temporarily. You're not drained. You set redirecting. Many people sabotage this stage by forcing themselves back into old patterns. They overwork again. They overcommit again. They chase urgency again, just to feel productive. But productivity built on outdated wiring leads back to burnout. True clarity rises slowly. It doesn't scream. It emerges. And when it does, your motivation feels different. It feels steady. It feels calm. It doesn't come from panic. It comes from purpose. Right now, if you feel like you've slowed down, ask yourself, were my old goals aligned with who I truly am, or with who I thought I had to be? Because if you're being rewired, you can't carry every old ambition forward. Some dreams were born from fear. Some ambitions were built from insecurity. And some goals only made sense for a version of you that no longer exists. Let them fall. This pause is not failure. That's purification. You are clearing space for goals that match your evolved identity. And when clarity rises, motivation will return, but it will feel different. It won't be frantic. It won't be desperate. It won't feel like you running from something. It will feel like you moving towards something. And that shift changes everything. So don't panic if you feel temporarily unmotivated. You're not losing momentum. You're transitioning from fear-driven movement to aligned movement. And aligned movement may start slower, but it lasts longer, and it builds something real. 6. Emotional numbness is not regression. There may be days lately when you don't feel much of anything. Not deep sadness, not intense joy, not the sharp highs or the crushing lows you once experienced. Just neutrality. And that neutrality can be unsettling. Because when you've lived in emotional intensity for a long time, calm can feel like emptiness. You may start questioning yourself. Why don't set I feel excited? Why don't set I care as much? Have I lost my passion? But what if this isn't set regression? What if this is stabilization? When someone has spent years in emotional survival mode, their nervous system becomes conditioned to extremes. Stress hormones spike easily. Reactions are amplified. Everything feels urgent, dramatic, personal. Over time, that intensity becomes familiar. It feels like being alive. But constant emotional intensity is not strength. It's just strain. And when rewiring begins, the nervous system gradually shifts from hyperreactivity to regulation. That shift feels quieter, less explosive, less dramatic. And because you're not used to it, your mind interprets it as numbness. But numbness and regulation are not the same. Numbness is shut down from overwhelm. Regulation is calm from control. The difference is subtle but powerful. In shutdown, you feel disconnected and powerless. In regulation, you feel steady and observant. You may notice that when something upsetting happens, you still register it, but it doesn't hijack you. When something exciting happens, you appreciate it, but you don't depend on it. This middle ground is unfamiliar territory. For years, your identity may have been tied to emotional intensity, the passionate one, the deeply sensitive one, the one who feels everything strongly. Now your system is balancing, and balance feels boring at first, but balance is sustainable. There just is also another important layer here. When you begin letting go of attachment to outcomes, your emotional spikes decrease. If you're no longer desperate for validation, rejection doesn't devastate you. If you're no longer chasing approval, criticism doesn't define you. If you're no longer clinging to people, distance doesn't shatter you. And that emotional independence can feel strange, because your old identity was intertwined with external reactions. Now you are more self-contained. You are not suppressing emotion. You are processing it without being consumed by it. This stage often feels like a plateau, but it's actually the foundation being reinforced. Think of it this way. If your emotions were once a storm, you're now becoming the sky. Storms still pass through, but they don't just destroy the structure. You observe them. You let them move. You remain intact. The problem is, society romanticizes emotional extremes. We celebrate passion that burns hot. We admire intensity that overwhelms. We associate drama with depth. But true depth is stable. True strength is quiet. True power does not need to explode to prove it exists. If you're feeling emotionally neutral lately, don't rush to reignite chaos just to feel alive. Many people sabotage their stability because they mistake peace for emptiness. They re-enter toxic dynamics. They create unnecessary conflict. They chase intensity again, simply to feel something sharp. But sharpness is not growth. It sets stimulation. Growth feels controlled. There's another sign that this isn't set regression. You're thinking more before reacting. You're observing more than expressing. You're conserving energy instead of spilling it everywhere. That SEP's not loss of emotion. That SEP's maturity. Emotional maturity doesn't eliminate feelings. It organizes them. It prevents them from dictating every decision. If you feel quieter inside, it's because the noise is settling. And when noise settles, clarity becomes possible. So don't panic if you don't feel the same emotional highs and lows. You are not becoming cold. You are becoming stable. And stability may not feel dramatic, but it builds a life that doesn't collapse under pressure. This stage is not regression, it is regulation. And regulation is the hidden foundation of long-term strength. 7. You start craving simplicity. One of the quietest but most powerful signs that you are being rewired is this: you no longer crave complexity. Drama feels exhausting. Arguments feel unnecessary. Proving yourself feels pointless. What once stimulated you now drains you, and that shift is not random. When your nervous system begins stabilizing, it stops seeking chaos as stimulation. For a long time, intensity may have felt like purpose. Fast conversations, emotional tension, constant movement, constant urgency, it all created a sense of importance. But intensity is not the same as meaning. And once your system learns that survival is no longer the priority, it begins craving something different. Peace, simplicity, clarity. You start wanting fewer conversations, but deeper ones. Fewer goals, but aligned ones. Fewer people, but genuine ones. And this can feel strange if you built your identity around being active, expressive, or socially involved. You may wonder, am I becoming boring? No, you are becoming selective. There is power in selectivity. When you were wired for survival, you tolerated more. You engaged more. You entertained more nonsense because your system was scanning for validation, attention, or security. Now that your internal foundation is strengthening, you no longer need constant external reinforcement. So you simplify. You remove unnecessary debates. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop entering spaces that require you to shrink. You begin conserving energy, and energy conservation is a sign of maturity. There's something deeply transformative about simplicity. When your life becomes simpler, your mind becomes clearer. When your mind becomes clearer, your decisions become sharper. When your decisions become sharper, your direction becomes undeniable. But simplicity can feel uncomfortable at first, because complexity keeps you distracted. And distraction feels productive when you're avoiding deeper alignment. When you simplify, you have fewer excuses. You can see what truly matters. You can see who truly aligns. You can see what truly fulfills you. And that clarity eliminates the illusion of busyness. You might notice that you speak less, but when you speak, it says intentional. You might notice that you react less, but when you respond, it says precise. You might notice that your circle is smaller, but your peace is greater. That sips not isolation. That sips refinement. There's also an ego component here. The ego loves noise. It loves attention. It loves complexity, because complexity creates identity through contrast. I sup busy. I am overwhelmed. I sip involved in everything. But awareness doesn't need chaos to feel significant. It feels significant through alignment. And alignment is simple. You start asking different questions. Is this necessary? Is this aligned? Is this draining or strengthening me? And when something doesn't pass those filters, you let it go. Not dramatically, not angrily, just calmly. That calm release is power. Many people equate simplicity with smallness, but simplicity is actually control. The more you simplify, the less external variables control your emotional state. You don't need 10 conversations to feel seen. You don't need constant updates to feel secure. You don't need complicated dynamics to feel alive. You are enough in stillness, and stillness creates strength. If you start craving quiet lately, if you are avoiding unnecessary drama, if you feel drawn towards structure, routine, depth, and fewer distractions, that is not withdrawal, that is evolution. You are trading chaos for clarity, and clarity is where real power lives. Simplicity is not a downgrade. It sups an upgrade in awareness, because when your life becomes simple, your energy becomes focused, and focused energy builds things that scattered energy never could. You are not shrinking, you are refining, and refinement always looks quieter from the outside, but internally, it is a profound shift. You are no longer chasing stimulation. You are building stability, and stability changes everything. 8. your intuition gets louder. There is a subtle shift that happens during rewiring that most people can't explain. You begin knowing things before they happen, not in a dramatic way, not in a mystical way, but in a calm, quiet certainty. You sense when something is off. You sense when someone isn't set aligned. You sense when a situation will not end well. And the most surprising part, you no longer argue with that feeling. For years you may have ignored your intuition. You overrode it with logic. You silenced it with hope. You dismissed it to avoid conflict. You felt something was wrong, but you stayed. You sensed misalignment, but you convinced yourself otherwise. Why? Because your survival wiring was louder than your inner voice. When you're operating from insecurity, your intuition gets drowned out by fear. Fear says, what if you sir overthinking? What if you sir too sensitive? What if you lose them? So you stay silent. But when rewiring begins, fear gradually loses control. And when fear quiets, intuition rises. Intuition is not panic. It is calm clarity. Panic feels urgent and loud. Intuition feels steady and grounded. You might notice that you trust your first impression more. You don't need excessive proof anymore. You don't need endless validation. You simply know. That knowing doesn't just come from ego. It comes from internal alignment. When your nervous system stabilizes, your perception sharpens. You are no longer reacting emotionally in the moment. You are observing patterns. You start noticing inconsistencies in tone. You start recognizing subtle shifts in behavior. You pick up on what isn't being said. And because you're less desperate for outcomes, you're more honest about what you're sensing. Before, you may have ignored red flags because you wanted connection. Now, you value peace more than attachment. That shift alone strengthens intuition. There's another layer to this. When you're no longer consumed by emotional chaos, your mental bandwidth increases. You have more awareness available. Less internal noise means more external clarity. You can read situations more accurately because you're not filtering everything through insecurity. You're not asking, do they like me? Did I do something wrong? Am I enough? You suffer asking, does this align? Does this feel stable? Is this consistent? Those are intuitive questions, and your answers come faster now. You may also feel drawn toward different environments, different conversations, different types of people. That SEP's intuition guiding alignment. You sir not just reacting to what is available. You sir sensing what fits. And when you follow that sense consistently, your life becomes more coherent. Intuition doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's simply a lack of excitement, a subtle hesitation, a quiet discomfort. But now you don't ignore it. You respect it. That respect builds trust with yourself, and self-trust is one of the strongest outcomes of rewiring. Because once you trust your perception, you stop outsourcing your decisions. You stop needing others to confirm what you already feel. You stop asking for permission to act on clarity. You simply move accordingly, calmly, without drama, without announcement. If you have been noticing that your inner voice feels clearer lately, if you start sensing patterns before they unfold, if you set walking away from things without needing a dramatic reason, that SIP's not coincidence. That SIP's alignment strengthening. You are no longer disconnected from your own perception. You are integrated, and integration amplifies intuition. You don't need to force it. You don't need to overanalyze it. You just need to listen, because when fear stops speaking, truth becomes audible, and that quiet truth will guide you more accurately than any external validation ever could. 9. You stop chasing what SEP's not meant for you. There comes a point in rewiring where something very quiet but very powerful happens. You stop chasing, not because you gave up, not because you're so tired, but because something inside you finally understands What is meant for you does not require constant pursuit. For a long time, chasing may have felt natural. Chasing clarity, chasing closure, chasing approval, chasing relationships, chasing opportunities. There was always a sense that if you didn't move first, push harder, try more, prove yourself again, you would lose. That mindset is rooted in scarcity. Scarcity says, if I don't force it, I shall miss it. If I don't hold on, it will disappear. If I don't prove my value, I shall be replaced. And survival wiring feeds off that urgency. But as rewiring progresses, urgency begins to dissolve. You start noticing something different. If someone pulls away, you don't chase immediately. If something feels inconsistent, you don't beg for reassurance. If an opportunity closes, you don't spiral into panic. Instead, you pause, and that pause changes everything. Because in that pause, you realize something deeper. If it requires constant effort to keep it alive, it may not be aligned. Chasing often comes from fear of loss. But when you begin feeling internally stable, loss doesn't feel catastrophic anymore. It feels informative. You begin to see that what naturally flows toward you requires less force, less convincing, less over-explaining, less self-betrayal. There is strength in allowing, not passive waiting, not laziness, but allowing alignment to reveal itself. When you stop chasing, you start observing. You notice who reaches out without pressure. You notice what opportunities unfold without manipulation. You notice what connections feel mutual instead of one-sided. And that awareness shifts your standards. You begin to understand that desperation distorts perception. When you settle chasing, you overlook red flags. You rationalize inconsistency. You tolerate imbalance. But when you stop chasing, clarity sharpens. You see patterns clearly because you're no longer emotionally invested in forcing outcomes. This doesn't mean you become passive in life. It means your energy becomes intentional. You move when it aligns. You step back when it doesn't set. You no longer chase validation from people who are unsure of you. You no longer overwork to impress those who are committed to misunderstanding you. You no longer exhaust yourself trying to convince someone of your worth, because your worth is no longer dependent on their response. And that shift is profound. There's also something psychologically powerful happening here. When you stop chasing, your nervous system exits fight or flight mode. Chasing activates anxiety. It activates overthinking. It activates the fear of abandonment. Letting go activates regulation. It activates trust. It activates confidence in timing. That confidence doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from alignment. You start believing that what truly belongs in your life will not require you to lose yourself to keep it. And that belief restructures your behavior. You speak more calmly. You detach more gracefully. You walk away more cleanly. And that composure feels unfamiliar at first, because intensity used to feel like effort. Now effort feels like misalignment. The deeper truth is this: when you stop chasing, you create space. And space invites what is compatible. People who respect you step closer. Opportunities aligned with your growth appear. Conversations become more reciprocal. Because you are no longer gripping tightly, you are standing firmly. And firm energy attracts differently than frantic energy. If you have noticed yourself stepping back instead of rushing forward, if you have felt less desperate to hold on to things, if you have walked away from something without dramatic closure, that sets not weakness. That sips internal security. You are not giving up. You are choosing alignment over attachment. And attachment often feels intense. But alignment feels peaceful. Peace may not be loud, but it is powerful. You are no longer chasing what isn't meant for you. You are allowing what is meant for you to meet you halfway. And that shift alone marks a completely different level of strength. Your standards quietly rise. One of the most powerful shifts that happens during rewiring is not loud. It sips not dramatic. It sips not announced. It happens silently. Your standards rise. Not because you became arrogant, not because you think you say better than anyone, but because you finally understand what costs you peace. For years you may have tolerated things you knew didn't sit right with you. Disrespect disguised as humor, inconsistency disguised as being busy, emotional unavailability disguised as independence. You accepted it because you didn't want to lose connection. You adjusted yourself to maintain access. You shrank to stay included. You rationalized behavior that hurt you because losing the relationship felt worse than losing yourself. But rewiring changes that equation. When your internal stability strengthens, your tolerance for misalignment weakens. You no longer feel the urge to negotiate your boundaries. You don't feel the need to argue your worth. You don't feel compelled to prove why you deserve consistency, clarity, and respect. You simply expect it, quietly, and if it's not there, you detach without performance. That sets the difference. Before, you might have reacted loudly when disappointed. Now you respond calmly. Before, you might have explained yourself repeatedly. Now you state once or not at all. Before, you might have begged for effort. Now you observe effort. This is not coldness. It is clarity. There's something deeply unsettling about raising your standards, because raising them forces you to release what no longer meets them, and that can feel like loss. You might realize certain friendships were built on convenience, not depth. You might realize certain dynamics were sustained by your over-functioning. You might realize you were carrying emotional weight that was never yours to begin with. That awareness is uncomfortable, but awareness is the beginning of power. Higher standards don't make you difficult. They make you intentional. You stop entertaining conversations that drain you. You stop giving energy to people who only show up when it benefits them. You stop explaining boundaries to those committed to crossing them, and you don't feel guilty about it, because you understand something now. Every time you lower your standards to keep someone, you lower your self-respect. And self-respect is not something you are willing to trade anymore. There's also a psychological shift happening underneath this. When your nervous system stabilizes, you no longer crave chaos as stimulation. You no longer mistake intensity for connection. You no longer confuse unpredictability with passion. So your standards adjust to reflect stability. You value consistency over excitement. You value clarity over mystery. You value peace over performance. And that shift can make you feel alone temporarily, because not everyone operates at that level. But loneliness caused by higher standards is different from loneliness caused by insecurity. One feels like empowerment. The other feels like fear. You are no longer afraid to walk away from what doesn't align. That alone changes how people approach you. When your standards rise, your energy shifts. You become harder to manipulate, harder to guilt, harder to pressure, because your internal compass is stronger. You don't react to breadcrumbs anymore. You don't celebrate minimal effort. You don't cling to almost. You want real, and you are willing to wait for it. That patience is power. The most profound part of raising your standards is this. You stop chasing what you have to convince yourself to accept. You start choosing what feels solid without justification. And that choice changes your trajectory. Because when you operate from higher standards, you filter differently. You move differently. You respond differently. You allow differently. Some people will say you've changed. They might say you suffered distant. They might say you steer less available. But what is really happening is this. You are no longer accessible to misalignment, and that will always disturb those who benefited from your lower standards. But you are not responsible for maintaining comfort at the expense of your evolution. Raising your standards is not about demanding more from others. It's about demanding honesty from yourself. If something drains you, you admit it. If something disrespects you, you acknowledge it. If something doesn't feel aligned, you don't force it. You trust your perception, and you act accordingly, quietly, without drama, without explanation. That is maturity. That is rewiring. Your standards have risen because your identity has evolved. You no longer accept what the old version of you tolerated, and that sips not loss. That sips growth solidifying. You are not becoming difficult. You are becoming defined. And defined people move differently in the world. They don't chase acceptance. They embody alignment. And alignment raises the entire quality of your life. 11. Your fear of losing people decreases. One of the most powerful and frightening shifts that happens during rewiring is this. You stop being afraid of losing people, not because you don't still care, not because you've become detached from connection, but because you finally understand something most people spend years avoiding. If someone can walk away because you grew, they were attached to your old version, not your true one. For a long time, the fear of losing people controlled your decisions. You softened your tone to avoid conflict. You stayed silent to avoid rejection. You overgave to avoid abandonment. You tolerated less than you deserved to avoid being alone. You convinced yourself that keeping the connection was more important than keeping your integrity, because deep down losing someone felt like losing stability. But that fear was rooted in scarcity. Scarcity says, if they leave, you won't find better. If you speak up, you shall be alone. If you change, you shall be rejected. And for a while, that belief shaped your behavior. But rewiring dismantles scarcity. When your internal foundation strengthens, you stop viewing people as emotional anchors. You stop depending on others to regulate your self-worth. You realize something simple but life-changing. Connection is valuable, but not at the cost of your evolution. And once that realization lands, fear loses its grip. You begin to notice that when someone pulls away, you don't panic like before. You don't immediately ask, what did I do wrong? You don't rush to repair something that may not be broken. You pause, you observe, and sometimes you let them go. That ability to let go calmly is not indifference. It sets confidence, because you now understand that alignment cannot be forced. You understand that some people were meant to walk with a specific version of you, not the one you're becoming. And that sips not betrayal. That sets transition. There is a grief that comes with this stage, because you might look back and realize how much of yourself you once bent to keep certain people close. You might see how much emotional labor you carried, how much reassurance you offered, how much you compromised your standards. And that awareness can sting, but it also liberates you, because once you see it clearly, you can't go back to unconscious attachment. There's another important layer here. When you stop fearing loss, you stop performing for retention. You don't exaggerate yourself to stay interesting. You don't silence your growth to stay relatable. You don't shrink your confidence to avoid intimidating others. You simply are who you are. And if that causes distance, you accept it. That acceptance is strength. Many people stay emotionally small because they are terrified of being alone. But rewiring teaches you something profound. Being alone is not the same as being abandoned. Being alone can be powerful. It can be clarifying. It can be peaceful. And once you experience peace alone, you stop tolerating chaos just to avoid solitude. That sets when fear dissolves, because fear feeds on dependency. When you are emotionally self-sufficient, you no longer cling. You connect, but you don't attach desperately. You love, but you don't beg. You care, but you don't chase. And that balance changes your entire presence. People feel it. They sense that you are not afraid to lose them. And paradoxically, that makes your presence stronger. because energy that does not cling feels grounded. There is also a hidden truth here. When you stop fearing loss, you make room for reciprocity. You no longer overextend. You no longer overinvest. You match energy. And matching energy filters your environment naturally. Those who value you step closer. Those who thrived on imbalance drift away. You don't set force either outcome. You allow it. This doesn't mean you become cold or disconnected. It means you become secure. Secure people don't threaten. They don't pressure. They don't manipulate. They simply offer themselves authentically. And if it's received, they continue. If it's not, they step back. Without resentment, without self-doubt, without collapse. If you felt less afraid of losing people lately, don't misinterpret it. You're not becoming careless. You as becoming confident. You understand now that the right connections will not require you to abandon your growth. The right people will adjust as you evolve. And those who can't adjust were not meant for the next chapter. You are no longer terrified of endings, because you have realized something powerful. Anything that leaves due to your evolution was never meant to survive your expansion. And expansion is not something you are willing to sacrifice anymore. That is not loss. That is freedom. 12. You realize this was always meant to happen. There comes a moment, usually quiet, usually unexpected, when everything starts to make sense. Not perfectly, not all at once, but enough. You look back at the confusion, the breakdowns, the silence, the distance, the discomfort, and instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" you begin asking, "What was this preparing me for?" That shift changes everything. For a long time, it may have felt like your life was unraveling. Plans didn't work. People left. Motivation dropped. Conversations faded. Identity blurred. You thought you were falling behind. You thought you were losing momentum. You thought something was wrong. But now, standing on the other side of the internal shift, you can see it differently. Nothing was random. Every uncomfortable season exposed something you needed to outgrow. Every loss removed something misaligned. Every silence forced you inward. Every disappointment redirected your standards. You weren't set collapsing. You were restructuring. The hardest part about transformation is that it rarely announces itself as growth. It disguises itself as confusion. When you were isolated, it didn't feel like recalibration. It felt like abandonment. When your motivation dropped, it didn't feel like purification. It felt like failure. When your emotions stabilized, it didn't feel like strength. It felt like numbness. But now you see the pattern. Each stage stripped something unnecessary. Each stage removed dependency. Each stage refined your perception. And what felt like loss was actually subtraction. Subtraction is painful because we associate removal with damage. But sometimes subtraction is protection. You were being protected from a future that would have required the old version of you to survive. And that version could not sustain what you're becoming. There's a quiet power in realizing that your breakdown was intentional, not in a mystical, dramatic sense, but in a psychological and evolutionary one. You had to reach discomfort to detach from comfort. You had to lose certain dynamics to understand your standards. You had to feel alone to discover your independence. You had to question yourself to find your clarity. And now, looking back, you recognize something profound. If everything had worked the way you wanted it to, you would have stayed the same. And staying the same would have been the real loss. Growth doesn't feel heroic in the moment. It feels uncertain. But hindsight reveals its design. You start noticing how certain conversations prepared you for boundaries, how certain betrayals prepared you for discernment, how certain silences prepared you for self-trust. You were being trained, quietly, internally, without applause. And because it happened inside you, not everyone will understand it. Some people still see the old version of you. Some still expect the old reactions. Some still think you are who you were, but you know differently. You feel it. Your decisions are calmer. Your responses are sharper. Your standards are clearer. Your fear is lower. That didn't happen overnight. It happened through every uncomfortable phase you once tried to escape. There is also peace in this realization, because when you see the pattern, you stop resisting the process. You stop fighting every uncomfortable moment. You start asking better questions. Instead of, "Why is this happening?" you ask, "What is this teaching me?" Instead of, "Why did I lose that?" you ask, "What did that free me from?" That mindset shift is the final stage of rewiring. You move from reaction to reflection, from panic to perspective, from fear to trust. You begin trusting that even the difficult seasons carry direction, not because everything is perfect, but because you have evidence now, evidence that every previous phase shaped you, and shaped you well. You are stronger without being louder, calmer without being detached, clearer without being rigid, and that clarity allows you to move forward differently. You no longer chase chaos. You no longer cling to what resists you. You no longer panic at silence, because you understand that silence once rebuilt you. If this realization has started forming inside you, don't dismiss it. It means the rewiring is stabilizing. It means the internal shift is integrating. It means you're no longer in the middle of confusion. You're emerging from it. And the most powerful part of emerging is this. You realize you were never losing. You were becoming. Every uncomfortable season was a bridge. Every emotional drop was a recalibration. Every ending was a redirection. This was not random. It was refinement. And now, standing in the awareness of it, you can move forward without fear of the next shift. Because you know something most people don't is, when it feels like everything is falling apart, it may actually be reorganizing around who you are meant to be. You didn't just fail. You evolved. And evolution always looks chaotic before it looks powerful. If you made it this far, it's not by accident. Something in you recognized this message. Because deep down you already felt the shift. You felt the detachment. You felt the silence. You felt the motivation changing. You felt yourself outgrowing things you once begged to keep, and it scared you. But now you understand. You were never losing. You were shedding old reactions, shedding old fears, shedding old identities that could not survive where you're going. Rewiring feels lonely before it feels powerful. It feels unstable before it feels elevated. It feels like loss before it feels like clarity. But clarity is coming, and when it fully settles, you will look back at this phase, the confusion, the discomfort, the quiet, and you will realize this was the moment everything changed. Not because something entered your life, but because something outdated left your system. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not fading. You are stabilizing into a stronger version of yourself. And once that stabilization completes, your standards will be different. Your relationships will be different. Your opportunities will be different. Because you will be different. So don't rush this phase. Don't numb it. Don't reverse it. Just to feel familiar again. Respect it. Because rewiring is rare. Most people stay stuck in old patterns for years. You didn't you evolved. And evolution is uncomfortable, but it is powerful. If this message resonated with you, it means you're already aware. And awareness is the beginning of transformation. Stay grounded, stay intentional. And remember, you stir not losing. You Sari becoming. I shall see you in the next one.